Hello everyone, Lara here. Grab a warm cup of tea and settle in because today I have a deeply moving, suspenseful story to share with you. This story is told from the perspective of a young woman who had to grow up in a heartbeat, and I think it will truly resonate with many of you. Let's dive. Part 1. Turning 18 is supposed to be a milestone celebrated with laughter, family, and a cake adorned with flickering candles. For me, it didn't bring any celebration. It brought the deafening, bone-chilling sound of a heavy oak door slamming squarely in my face. Shivering violently on the wet pavement, watching the relentless autumn rain beat down on the concrete, I felt completely destroyed. My entire existence was crammed into 3 black, heavy-duty trash bags sitting at my feet. Exactly 17 years, 11 months, and 29 days. That was precisely how long I was allowed to be a child. The very moment the clock struck midnight, signaling my official transition into adulthood, the fragile, toxic truce that had kept my fractured family together under one roof shattered into a million unfixable pieces. My stepfather, Julian Vance, had been counting down the days to this moment with a sickening, patient anticipation. Julian was a highly successful, prominent commercial real estate developer in our region. To the community, he was a pillar of success, always wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a practiced smile. But that smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. From the very day he married my mother, Julian had made it perfectly clear that he viewed me as nothing more than an unwanted liability, a financial and emotional burden he couldn't wait to excise from his life. Worse than that, I was a painful living reminder of my biological father, a kind, hardworking man who had tragically passed away when I was just a toddler. His sudden death left my mother vulnerable, emotionally broken, and desperate for financial security. Julian provided that lavish security, but he extracted his payment in absolute, unwavering control over every single aspect of our lives. So there I stood on the sidewalk of our upscale, manicured suburban neighborhood, trembling from both the freezing wind and the sheer shock of what was happening. The October rain was unforgiving, plastering my hair to my face and soaking through my jacket. I looked down at the plastic bags containing everything I owned in the world, a few pairs of worn jeans, some oversized sweaters to keep out the chill, a small shoebox filled with faded family photographs, and a worn patchwork quilt that my maternal grandmother had lovingly made for me before she passed away. Desperate, I looked up at the second-story window of the master bedroom. The heavy silk curtains twitched. I knew exactly who it was. My mother, Evelyn, was standing there, watching me. For a fleeting, foolish second, my heart leaped with hope. I thought she might run downstairs, push past Julian, open the front door, and tell me that this was all a terrible mistake. I hoped her maternal instinct would finally kick in. Instead, the curtain fell flatly back into place, sealing my fate. She had made her choice. She chose her luxurious lifestyle, her country club memberships, and her domineering husband over her own flesh and blood. The weight of that betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest, leaving me gasping for air. The emotional pain was far worse than the freezing wind cutting through my clothes. I took a deep breath and tried to evaluate my reality. I had exactly $34 left in my bank account. I didn't own a vehicle. I hadn't even graduated from high school yet. I was still 2 long months away from receiving my diploma. Gathering the slippery plastic handles of the trash bags in my numb, frozen fingers, I began to walk. Every single step felt like wading through thick, wet cement. I had absolutely no clue where I was going, only that I had to keep moving forward to stave off the hypothermia creeping into my bones. After trudging for 2 agonizing miles down the dark shoulder of the highway, the flickering neon lights of a 24-hour diner pierced through the gloomy downpour. The glowing sign read Mabel's Diner. It was a dilapidated, old, greasy spoon that smelled eternally of stale coffee and fried onions. But in that exact moment, it looked like a sanctuary. I pushed through the heavy glass door, the small brass bell jingling cheerfully above me, a sharp, ironic contrast to the absolute devastation crushing my soul. I slid quietly into a cracked red vinyl booth in the furthest back corner, carefully hiding my trash bags underneath the table so no one would look at me with pity. When the waitress approached, I ordered a single black coffee, wrapping my trembling hands around the warm ceramic mug just to leach its heat into my frozen skin. I sat there for hours, watching the rain streak down the dirty window pane, crying silently until I had no tears left to cry. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to survive the night, let alone the coming weeks. Should I try to find a local homeless shelter? Could I drop out of high school entirely and beg for a full-time job right here at the diner? Around 6 o'clock in the morning, just as the first gray light of dawn began to break through the storm, the diner door chimed again. A tall, impeccably dressed older gentleman carrying a fine leather briefcase walked inside. He looked entirely out of place amidst the tired truck drivers and weary night shift workers. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes eventually landing directly on me. To my absolute bewilderment, he walked straight over to my booth, stopped, and politely took off his fedora. "Celine Rhodes?" he asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, and surprisingly gentle. I instantly stiffened, my defensive walls going up as I pulled my damp coat tighter around myself. "Who's asking?" I replied defensively. "My name is Thomas Sterling," he said, sliding a crisp business card across the sticky Formica table. "I am an attorney with Sterling and Associates. I've been actively looking for you for nearly 3 weeks. Your stepfather made it quite difficult to locate you, but I had a feeling you might still be in the immediate area. May I sit down?" I nodded slowly, completely bewildered by his presence. Did Julian send you? If he wants me to sign some legal waiver saying I won't sue him for support, just tell him I don't care. I just want to be left alone." Mr. Sterling sighed, a look of profound distaste crossing his aristocratic features. "No, Celine, I do not represent Julian Vance. I represent the estate of Clara Sullivan, your late grandmother." My breath hitched in my throat. Grandmother Clara. She was the eccentric, wildly independent owner of a dusty antique shop in the neighboring historic town of Oak Haven. She was the only person in my entire life who had ever made me feel unconditionally loved and valued. But she had tragically passed away from a sudden stroke 6 months ago. Julian had strictly forbidden me from attending her funeral, claiming it would disrupt my high school studies, though I knew the bitter truth. It was just another calculated way for him to isolate and punish me. "Grandma Clara's estate?" I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. "I thought my mother inherited everything she owned." "Your mother inherited the personal life insurance policy," Mr. Sterling corrected gently, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick, official-looking manila envelope. "But the commercial property, specifically the historic building located at 402 Elm Street, known to the town as Sullivan's Curiosities, was placed in a highly specialized private trust, a trust that I have been personally managing." He pushed the heavy envelope across the table toward my coffee mug. "Your grandmother was a very perceptive, intelligent woman, Celine. She knew exactly what kind of man Julian Vance was. She explicitly stipulated in her final will and testament that the deed to the antique shop, along with all of its contents, were to be legally transferred to you, and only you, on the exact date of your 18th birthday. That day is today." I stared at the thick stack of legal documents, my mind spinning. "She left me the shop? She left you a sanctuary," Mr. Sterling said softly, offering a reassuring smile. He reached back into his pocket and placed a heavy, vintage brass keyring on top of the legal paperwork. "These are the keys. The property is officially yours, free and clear of any mortgages. However, I must give you a fair warning. Clara was struggling financially toward the very end of her life. The shop has been locked and closed for 6 months now, and the building is quite old. But it is a solid roof over your head, Celine. It is entirely yours." I reached out and picked up the brass keys. They felt heavy, cold, and incredibly real in my hand. In an instant, the crushing weight of hopelessness lifted just a fraction. I wasn't homeless. I actually had a place to go. I looked up at Mr. Sterling, a new wave of tears blurring my vision. But this time, they were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. "She also left you this," the attorney added, handing me a small, sealed white envelope with my name written across the front in Grandma Clara's elegant, looping cursive handwriting. "She specifically asked me to ensure that you read this letter only when you were entirely alone." I clutched the letter tightly to my chest like a lifeline. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't just Celine, the unwanted burden thrown out into the rain. I was Celine Rhodes, a property owner. The bus ride to the neighboring town of Oak Haven took about 45 minutes. By the time I hauled my 3 heavy garbage bags down Elm Street, the torrential rain had finally slowed to a dismal, foggy drizzle. Oak Haven was a much older town than the suburb I grew up in, filled with historic brick buildings and massive and ancient oak trees whose roots had buckled the concrete sidewalks over the decades. I walked down the street until I finally found 402 Elm Street, wedged tightly between a failing local bakery and a completely vacant boarded-up storefront. The words Sullivan's Curiosities were painted in faded, elegant gold leaf across the large front window, though the glass was currently obscured by a thick, heavy layer of dust and grime. The exterior brickwork was visibly chipped, and the weathered wooden awning sagged slightly. It looked exactly like what it was, a forgotten relic of the past. My hands shook violently as I inserted the heavy brass key into the rusted deadbolt of the front door. It took a bit of forceful wiggling, but the old lock finally gave way with a loud, heavy mechanical click. I pushed the door open, the old iron hinges screaming in loud protest from months of disuse. The air inside the shop was incredibly stagnant, smelling heavily of old paper, lemon wax polish, dried lavender, and damp wood. As I stepped inside, I realized the shop was a chaotic, beautiful labyrinth of history. Grandfather clocks stood like tall, silent sentinels in the dusty corners. Glass display cases were crammed to the brim with tarnished silver pocket watches, old porcelain dolls with unblinking eyes, and stacks of leather-bound books. Furniture from every imaginable era was piled haphazardly throughout the floor space: Victorian chaises, Art Deco vanities, and rustic farmhouse tables. It was utterly overwhelming, yet at the exact same time, it felt incredibly comforting. It smelled precisely like Grandma Clara. I immediately locked the heavy door behind me, dragged my trash bags behind a massive oak service counter, and collapsed onto a faded velvet sofa nearby. The sheer physical and emotional exhaustion of the night finally caught up with me. Surrounded by thousands of forgotten memories, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up hours later, shivering uncontrollably. The antique shop had no central heating, and the bitter autumn chill had easily seeped through the old, uninsulated brick walls. I sat up on the sofa, my stomach rumbling violently from hunger. I knew I needed to immediately assess my situation. I had exactly $34, a historic building, and a literal mountain of old antiques. I figured my best option was to find a few valuable pieces I could easily sell to a local pawn shop, just to get enough quick cash to turn the electricity and water utilities back on. I walked behind the main oak counter to search for a flashlight or a business ledger. Instead, I discovered a towering, neglected stack of mail that the local postman had been systematically shoving through the brass mail slot in the front door for the past 6 months. I sat down and began sorting through the envelopes. Most of them were just junk mail and advertisements, but a few of them bore the official, ominous seal of the Oak Haven County tax collector. I ripped the first official letter open. My heart, which had just started to steady, plummeted straight into my stomach. It was a final notice for unpaid commercial property taxes. Panic rising, I tore open the next one, and the next. Together, they painted a devastatingly clear financial picture. Grandma Clara hadn't paid the property taxes for the last 3 years of her life as her health declined. The total amount owed to the county, including mounting late fees, interest, and legal penalties, was a staggering $14,850. The final red-stamped letter stated in cold, bureaucratic terms that if the debt was not paid in full by November 15th, which was exactly 30 days from today, the county would officially seize the property and put it up for public auction to the highest bidder. I dropped the legal papers onto the dusty floorboards, my hands trembling. My sanctuary was actually a trap, a 30-day ticking time bomb. I didn't even have $14 to spare, let alone $14,000. Mr. Sterling had assured me the property was free of a mortgage, but he clearly hadn't known about these delinquent back taxes. The local government was going to take away the only thing I had left in the entire world. Bang, bang, bang. The sudden, violent pounding on the front glass door made me jump in terror, nearly knocking over a delicate crystal lamp on the counter. "Celine, I know you're in there." A loud, commanding voice boomed from the street. "Open this door right now." My blood ran completely cold. I knew that voice anywhere. It was Julian. "Hold on just a second. If you are hooked on this story and want to hear more of my intense life experiences, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment down below too. It helps me immensely, and I would be incredibly grateful for your support. Now, let's get straight back to the story." Part 2. I stood up slowly, almost soundlessly from the cold floor behind the counter, trying not to make a single noise that would give away my presence. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I was terrified the sound would echo through the silent, shadowed room. I began to creep cautiously toward the large front window, navigating through a minefield of antique furniture and delicate porcelain figurines. Finding a small patch of glass cleared of the thick layer of dust and grime, I peered out into the street. My worst fears were instantly confirmed. Parked aggressively against the curb was his gleaming, pitch-black Mercedes, a vehicle that had always served as a symbol of his status, immense wealth, and absolute authority over our family. Standing on the sidewalk was Julian Vance himself. He was wearing an impeccably tailored, expensive Italian suit that looked completely absurd against the backdrop of this forgotten, historic Oak Haven street. His posture radiated pure fury and impatience. His lips were pressed into a tight line as he stared at the building with utter disgust. Julian was a man who had never waited a single second for anyone in his entire life. My mind raced, trying to figure out how he had managed to track me down so quickly. Only a few hours had passed since I arrived in this town. But then, Cold logic took over. Julian wasn't just my stepfather. He was a powerful, highly influential commercial real estate developer with deep connections throughout the entire region. He had people in every local municipality, city council, and county office. He had likely set an automatic alert in the county property registry months ago, knowing that on my 18th birthday, the deed to this building would officially transfer to my name. He had calculated my every move before I even knew I would make it. Bang, bang, bang. The heavy blows of his fist struck the glass door again, making the old wooden frame groan under the pressure. "Celine, stop acting like a stubborn, foolish child," he shouted through the glass, his voice dripping with arrogance and irritation. "The county tax assessor is a close personal friend of mine. I know exactly what kind of situation you're in. I know all about the massive tax lien hanging over this dump. Don't try to hide from me. I know you're inside." I realized there was nowhere left to run. This building was my only shelter, but it couldn't shield me from his reach. My hands shook as I walked to the entrance. I slowly turned the heavy deadbolt that had given me so much trouble earlier and opened the door just a fraction of an inch, blocking the opening with my body. "What do you want from me, Julian?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound firm despite the terror knotting my stomach. "You threw me out into the rain last night. You got exactly what you wanted. Our house is completely yours, and my mother is entirely under your thumb. Why can't you just leave me alone?" Instead of answering, Julian merely sneered, a cruel, familiar smile twisting his face. With a sudden confident shove, he pushed the door forward. His physical strength completely overpowered mine, and I couldn't hold the frame. The door swung wide open, and he stepped uninvited into my sanctuary. As he crossed the threshold, Julian visibly wrinkled his nose in disgust, taking in the dust, the decaying furniture, and the stagnant air of the antique shop. "What do I want, Celine? I want to save you from your own staggering stupidity and pride," he said, his tone dripping with a sickening, manufactured fatherly concern. "Your late grandmother Clara was nothing more than a delusional hoarder and a complete financial failure. Look around you. This building is a structural hazard. It's practically condemned. It's rotting from the inside out, riddled with toxic mold and asbestos. You can't safely stay here. Get out of here," I whispered, feeling a spark of intense anger begin to override the fear in my chest. "This is my property. You have no legal right to be here. Get out." Julian completely ignored my words, treating me like an annoying insect rather than the rightful owner of the estate. He began to pace slowly across the creaking floorboards, his hands clasped behind his back. His professional developer's eyes scanned the space, instantly calculating the ceiling height, the structural integrity of the walls, and the total square footage of the commercial plot. He didn't care about the history. He only saw a profit margin. "Let's face reality, girl," he said, stopping dead in his tracks and turning to face me. "You owe the county $15,000 in back taxes. You don't have a job. You have absolutely no steady income. You don't even have a credit score to secure a microloan from a bank. You are completely invisible to the financial system." He stepped closer, his towering shadow completely enveloping me. "You are going to lose this building in exactly 30 days, Celine. The county will seize it for the debt, put it up for public auction, and you will be thrown onto the street with absolutely nothing to your name. You will sink straight to the bottom." With those words, Julian slowly reached into the breast pocket of his pristine suit jacket and pulled out a sleek leather checkbook and an expensive pen. "But as I said, I am a generous man, and I'm willing to offer you a way out of this disaster," he continued, flipping the checkbook open. "I am prepared to write you a check right here on the spot for $20,000. Think about it. That is a fortune for a girl in your position. I will completely assume your tax debt, clear the lien, bulldoze this eyesore that ruins the look of the entire street, and build the luxury boutique hotel this town desperately needs." He waved the checkbook directly in front of my face. $20,000, Celine. That is more than enough to rent a clean apartment in the city, buy a reliable used car, and finally start your adult life. All you have to do is sign your name right here, transferring the title over to my LLC. Think carefully. This is your only lifeline. I stared at the checkbook in his hands. $20,000. For a girl who had exactly $34 to her name, who didn't know where she would sleep or how she would buy her next meal, it sounded like a fantasy. It was instant security. It was a chance to escape the cold, the fear, the crushing debt, and his relentless pressure. All I had to do was surrender, sign a single piece of paper, and the nightmare would be over. But then, I forced my gaze away from the check and looked directly into his eyes. In that split second, the illusion shattered. His eyes were burning with an intense, predatory hunger. He was entirely too eager. too desperate for my signature. Julian Vance had never done a single kind or altruistic thing in his entire life. If this ruthless, calculating man was offering me $20,000 right now, it meant only one thing. The land beneath this shop, or the building itself, was worth at least 10 times that amount. He was trying to exploit my desperation, my hunger, and my youth to swindle me out of the inheritance Grandma Clara had spent her life protecting. I suddenly remembered how Julian had tried to buy this very building from my grandmother for years, and Clara had always answered him with a fierce, proud refusal. She hadn't broken then, and I had no right to betray her memory now. No, I said quietly, keeping my voice completely steady. The manufactured, benevolent smile vanished from Julian's face as if it had never existed. His lips thinned into a razor-sharp line and his eyes narrowed into cold slits. His face contorted with a sudden, unbridled rage. "Excuse me?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "I said no," I repeated louder, looking him dead in the eye, feeling an unfamiliar, ironclad strength rising within me. "I am not selling anything to you. Not today. Not tomorrow. Never. This building stays with me." Julian took a menacing step forward, completely towering over me. He was using the exact same physical and psychological intimidation tactics he had used for years at home to keep my unfortunate mother in a state of absolute submission and fear. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger. "You arrogant, ungrateful, worthless little brat," he growled through gritted teeth, his voice vibrating with fury. "You really think you can play business with me? What do you think you have to fight me with? I will ruin you, Celine. I will bury you. I won't lift a single finger to help you. I will let the county strip this property away from you, and then I will simply walk onto the auction floor and buy it for pennies. You won't see a single cent. You'll end up on the streets in the dirt, exactly where you belong." My heart was racing wildly, but I refused to take even half a step back. I extended my arm and pointed my trembling finger directly at the open front door. "Get out of my shop," I demanded, forcing my voice not to break into a scream. "Leave right now. If you aren't gone this very second, I will call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing on private property." Julian froze for a fraction of a second, and then he burst into a loud, harsh, incredibly cruel laugh. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, sending a chill down my spine. "You're going to call the police?" he mocked. "Look at yourself, Celine. You don't even have a phone, let alone money for a service plan. Who exactly are you going to call? Enjoy the rats in this garbage dump. You are absolutely nothing." He turned sharply on the heel of his expensive shoes and stormed toward the exit. Julian stepped out onto the street, and the heavy oak door slammed shut behind him with a deafening crash. The force of it made the large display windows rattle violently, threatening to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The moment the sound of his footsteps faded completely, my strength vanished. My legs turned to jelly and I slid down the wooden counter, collapsing onto the dusty floor. I sat there, curling my knees tightly to my chest, gasping for air as I tried to fight off a massive panic attack. The adrenaline that had sustained me poured out of my body, leaving behind a hollow, terrifying void of complete despair. What had I just done? I had personally walked away from $20,000. I had rejected my only shot at financial survival purely out of pride, stubbornness, and raw intuition. What now? I had exactly 30 days left before my only roof was seized. I was completely isolated, broken, and backed into a corner. After a long time, I forced myself to stand up. Sitting on the floor and crying wouldn't solve my problems. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to keep this shop and prove to Julian that he couldn't break me, I had to act immediately. I needed to find something valuable in this building, something I could sell for real money to clear the tax debt. I began an absolute frantic search through every single corner of the old shop. I yanked open the heavy drawers of antique dressers, peered behind dark paintings in massive frames, and dug through dusty boxes of old vinyl records and letters. But everything I touched was covered in decades of thick grease and grime. Nothing looked like it possessed any real value or belonged in a museum. To my untrained eye, it all looked like ordinary junk that people sell at yard sales for a couple of dollars. Hours bled into one another. The dim autumn light filtering through the dirty windows began to fade into deep, ominous shadows. I was completely exhausted. My hands were stained black with soot, my nails were broken, and my face was swollen from tears of utter helplessness. At the very back of the main showroom, against the far rear wall, stood a massive, incredibly heavy oak wardrobe adorned with intricate Gothic carvings. It looked like it had been anchored to that exact spot for a century. In a final wave of desperation, I decided to check if anything was hidden behind it or underneath it. I gripped its rough wooden edges with my bleeding fingers, planted my boots firmly on the floor, and threw the entire weight of my body into pushing it aside. With a heavy, agonizing screech, the wardrobe reluctantly shifted across the floorboards. And in that exact moment, a loud, strangely hollow thud echoed beneath my feet. I stopped instantly, my heavy breathing freezing in my throat. I looked down. Where the heavy oak wardrobe had just stood, the structure of the flooring was entirely different. These boards weren't the long, continuous planks that made up the rest of the room. They were meticulously and intentionally cut into a perfect, distinct square. My heart hammered in a frantic rhythm, but this time it wasn't fear. It was pure anticipation. I dropped to my knees directly into the dust and began furiously scrubbing away decades of thick gray grime with the sleeves of my sweater. Within seconds, my fingers struck something cold and metallic. It was an old rusted iron ring recessed deep into the wood. It was a trapdoor. I grabbed the iron ring with both hands, bracing my boots against the floorboards, and pulled upward with every ounce of physical strength left in my exhausted body. The old wood groaned in protest, the rusted hinges fighting against my weight. But I refused to give up. I gave one more massive, desperate heave, and with a loud mechanical crack, the frozen hinges finally snapped. The heavy wooden trapdoor slowly lifted, revealing a dark, yawning abyss below. A steep, narrow wooden ladder disappeared down into the black earth. A sudden draft of air rushed up from the depths. To my astonishment, the air wasn't damp or stagnant like a typical old cellar. It was remarkably dry and clean, smelling distinctly of fresh cedar and something else. Something sharp and unmistakably metallic. In that exact moment, I remembered the small white envelope Mr. Sterling had handed me at the diner. The letter Grandma Clara had explicitly asked me to read only when I was completely alone. With trembling hands, I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket and carefully tore it open. Inside was a single page of heavy parchment paper, covered in the elegant, looping cursive handwriting of my grandmother. I held it close to my face in the dim light and began to read the words that would change my life forever. My dearest Celine, if you are reading these lines, it means I am no longer in this world, and the wolves have already begun to circle you. Julian will inevitably try to strip the shop away from Part 3. The narrow wooden ladder groaned under my weight as I descended into the absolute darkness of the hidden basement. With each step downward, the familiar sounds of Elm Street, the distant hum of traffic, and the rhythmic patter of the rain faded into a heavy, profound silence. When my boots finally touched the solid concrete floor, I stood perfectly still, waiting for my eyes to adjust. The darkness was total, a thick velvet blanket that seemed to press against my skin. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing past my grandmother's letter until they found the small plastic lighter I had scavenged from the diner's counter. I flicked it open. A small, dancing yellow flame erupted into life, casting long, monstrous shadows across the underground chamber. The space was surprisingly expansive, stretching far beyond the footprint of the antique shop above. The air was exceptionally crisp, bone-dry, and maintained a constant cool temperature. As I held the tiny flame aloft, I saw that the walls weren't made of crumbling stone or rough dirt like a typical old root cellar. Instead, they were constructed from thick, reinforced concrete blocks, sealed with a heavy waterproof coating. Grandma Clara hadn't just discovered a basement. She had meticulously engineered a subterranean fortress. Following the guidance in her letter, I moved along the smooth wall until the flickering light illuminated a massive obstacle directly ahead. Standing before me was a towering, industrial-grade steel vault door embedded seamlessly into the reinforced concrete structure. It looked like it belonged in a high-security Federal Reserve Bank, not beneath a dusty antique shop in a sleepy historic town. In the center of the cold steel plate sat a heavy, mechanical combination dial, its polished chrome finish glinting sharply in the firelight. Above the dial, a small digital keypad glowed with a faint, amber standby light, powered by an independent battery backup system. My breath hitched. This was the moment of truth. I stepped closer, the cold air radiating from the metal chilling my face. I raised a trembling hand and pressed the activation key on the electronic panel. The screen blinked to life, prompting me for an entry code. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. The exact date of your birth, Grandma Clara's letter had said. I entered the numbers carefully, one by one. The month, the day, the year. Each button press emitted a sharp, high-pitched electronic beep that echoed loudly off the concrete walls. I pressed the final digit. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and my stomach twisted in a sudden knot of pure terror. What if I had miscalculated? What if Julian had somehow altered the system? Then, a heavy, mechanical click resounded from deep within the door's mechanism. The amber light on the keypad instantly flashed a brilliant green. A profound, low rumble vibrated through the concrete floor as a series of massive motorized steel deadbolts automatically retracted inside the frame. I grabbed the large circular metal wheel in the center of the door and turned it clockwise with all my strength. The heavy machinery rotated with astonishing smoothness, gliding effortlessly on heavily greased industrial hinges. I pulled the vault door open, and a soft, automated LED lighting track inside the ceiling triggered instantly, flooding the interior of the vault with a brilliant, stark white light. I stepped over the threshold, and the sight before me completely stole the breath from my lungs. I staggered backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. This wasn't a storage room. It was a literal treasury. Arranged neatly on heavy-duty industrial shelving units were dozens of sturdy, reinforced plastic crates. The crate directly in front of me was completely uncovered. Inside, stacked in flawless, gleaming rows, were hundreds of heavy rectangular bars of pure bullion. Under the bright LED lights, the metal radiated a warm, hypnotic glow that seemed to banish the shadows entirely. Next to the bullion crates sat rows of vintage canvas bank bags, each tightly sealed with heavy lead locks and clearly labeled with black stenciled letters indicating their contents. U.S. Mint Silver Dollars, 1921 to 1935. I walked forward as if in a trance, my boots clicking softly on the clean floor. I reached out and picked up one of the heavy bars. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than I anticipated, its smooth, cold surface bearing an official stamp certifying its purity and weight. This single bar alone was worth more than Julian's entire $20,000 handout, and there were dozens of them. Beside the precious metals, another shelf held meticulously cataloged archival boxes. I opened the nearest one and discovered stacks of pristine, uncirculated historical currency, rare numismatic coins preserved in protective plastic slabs, and velvet-lined trays containing loose, brilliantly cut gemstones, emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds that captured the light like fragments of fallen stars. Grandma Clara hadn't been a struggling, eccentric shopkeeper drowning in debt. She'd been an incredibly brilliant, fiercely independent wealth preservationist. She had systematically converted her life's work, her profits, and her entire family legacy into tangible, untrackable assets, completely hidden from the prying eyes of the corporate banking system, the government, and most importantly, Julian Vance. I collapsed onto a small wooden stool inside the vault, my mind utterly spinning as I tried to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what I was looking at. I wasn't just safe. I wasn't just a property owner with a roof over my head. I was independently, astronomically wealthy. The crushing weight of the $14,000 tax debt that had driven me to the brink of despair just an hour ago was nothing more than a microscopic drop in a vast ocean of security. Julian thought he could starve me out, break my spirit, and buy my birthright for pennies. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting on a fortune that could rival his entire real estate empire. As I sat there, the initial shock slowly morphed into a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of validation. Grandma Clara had seen the truth. She had known the depth of Julian's greed and my mother's tragic compliance. She had anticipated this exact storm, and she had spent years building this magnificent lifeboat specifically to save me from drowning. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered into the quiet warmth of the vault, my voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down. I promise." With that vow, a sudden, powerful shift occurred within me. The scared, discarded 18-year-old girl who had been thrown out into the rain died right there on that concrete floor. In her place, a resilient, determined woman stood up. I didn't just have the means to survive anymore. I had the ammunition to fight back. I spent the next several hours carefully exploring the vault, realizing that Grandma Clara's genius went far beyond just hoarding wealth. In the corner of the room sat a heavy steel fireproof filing cabinet. I pulled open the top drawer and found a series of neatly organized folders. They didn't contain financial statements. They contained information. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes widened. Clara had kept meticulous, detailed records of every single business transaction Julian Vance had ever attempted in Oak Haven County over the last 15 years. There were copies of internal municipal memos, zoning applications, private land surveys, and confidential environmental reports. My grandmother had been keeping a close watch on him. She knew that Julian's grand ambition was to acquire every single historic property on Elm Street, demolish the heritage buildings, and construct a massive, multi-million-dollar commercial plaza and luxury hotel complex. My antique shop wasn't just an eyesore to him. It was the absolute linchpin of his entire development strategy. It sat directly in the center of the block. Without owning 402 Elm Street, Julian could never secure the necessary contiguous zoning permits from the city council. His entire empire was completely dead in the water without my signature. That was why he had showed up at my door in such a frantic, aggressive rage. It wasn't an act of charity. It was a desperate and calculated attempt to eliminate the final obstacle standing between him and a multi-million-dollar corporate windfall. He needed me gone, and he needed it done before the upcoming city council zoning vote in November. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that I had never felt on my face before. Julian thought he held all the cards because he had power, money, and influence. But he didn't know that the playing field had just been completely leveled. I carefully selected 2 small, easily transportable gold bars from the open crate and slipped them into the deep pockets of my winter coat. They felt incredibly heavy, a comforting, solid weight against my thighs. I then pulled out several specific legal documents from the filing cabinet regarding Julian's upcoming zoning hearing. I stepped out of the treasury, pulled the massive steel vault door shut, and spun the mechanical combination dial, locking the secrets securely away in the dark. I climbed back up the wooden ladder, pushing the hidden trapdoor back into place, and meticulously slid the massive oak wardrobe over the frame until the floor looked completely undisturbed. By the time I finished, the first light of a new day was beginning to filter through the grimy front windows of Sullivan's Curiosities. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, clear autumn morning. I walked to the small bathroom at the back of the shop, washed the thick black dust from my face and hands, brushed my hair, and straightened my clothes. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The hollow, terrified look in my eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. I needed professional allies, and I knew exactly where to find them. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, I walked out of the antique shop, locked the front door securely behind me, and headed down Elm Street toward the Historic District's Professional Center. My destination was a beautiful, restored Victorian brick building, housing the law offices of Sterling and Associates. When I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the firm, the elegant receptionist looked up from her desk, her eyes scanning my worn jeans and damp jacket with a subtle hint of professional skepticism. "Good morning," I said, keeping my posture straight and my voice entirely calm. "I am Celine Rhodes. I need to speak with Mr. Thomas Sterling immediately. It is an urgent matter regarding the estate of Clara Sullivan." The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly at the mention of my grandmother's name. She picked up her desk phone, spoke quietly into the receiver for a brief moment, and then looked back up at me with a polite nod. "Mr. Sterling will see you right away, Miss Rhodes. Please follow me." She led me down a carpeted hallway lined with towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes, opening the door to a spacious, sunlit corner office. Mr. Sterling was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a cup of steaming tea in front of him. When he saw me enter, he immediately stood up, his face registering a mixture of surprise and genuine concern. "Celine," he said, walking around the desk to greet me. "Please sit down. I must admit, I didn't expect to see you back so soon. Are you all right? You look different than you did at the diner yesterday." "I am more than all right, Mr. Sterling," I replied, taking a seat in one of the comfortable leather armchairs. "I have spent the last 24 hours assessing the reality of my inheritance, and I require your immediate professional services." Mr. Sterling returned to his chair, folding his hands over his desk. "Of course. As I told you, I am the executor of Clara's trust. How can I help you?" I reached into my coat pockets, pulled out the 2 heavy, gleaming gold bullion bars, and placed them firmly onto the polished mahogany surface of his desk with a loud, solid thud. Mr. Sterling froze. He stared at the 2 gold bars, his eyes widening in complete, uncharacteristic astonishment. He slowly reached out, picked up one of the bars, feeling its immense weight, and examined the official purity stamps engraved on the surface. He looked up at me, his legal composure completely shattered. "Celine, where on earth did you get these?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "They were left to me by my grandmother," I stated calmly. "They are part of a private asset cache located securely within the property at 402 Elm Street, and this is only a microscopic fraction of what is down there." Mr. Sterling let out a long, slow breath, a look of profound realization washing over his face. "Clara, you brilliant, stubborn woman," he murmured to himself, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He set the gold bar back down and looked at me with an entirely new level of respect. "She always told me she had a plan to protect you, but she never revealed the specifics. She didn't even trust me with the full details. She trusted the system to fail me, and she trusted Julian to attack me," I said. And she was right on both counts. Julian Vance came to my shop yesterday afternoon. He threatened me, insulted my grandmother's memory, and attempted to intimidate me into signing over the deed to the property for $20,000. Mr. Sterling's face darkened instantly. That predator. He wastes no time. Did you sign anything, Celine? Absolutely not, I said firmly. I threw him out of my shop. But he made it clear that he knows about the $14,850 in delinquent property taxes. He intends to let the county seize the building in 30 days and buy it at the public auction. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the desk. I want that debt erased today, Mr. Sterling. I want the tax lien completely cleared, and I want the deed to Sullivan's Curiosities secured irrevocably in my name. I assume you have the professional connections to facilitate the... Part 4. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, a sharp, calculating glint appearing in his eyes. He opened a lower drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick, blue-bound folder labeled Oakhaven Urban Redevelopment Project. He laid it out between us, flipping open the pages to reveal architectural blueprints, satellite maps, and zoning applications. Your grandmother's notes in that filing cabinet were entirely accurate, Celine, Mr. Sterling began, pointing his pen at a map of Elm Street. Julian Vance has been operating through a series of shell companies, primarily registered as Vance Horizon Holdings LLC and Apex Development Partners. Over the last 3 years, he has quietly purchased 5 of the 7 commercial lots on this specific historic block. The bakery to your left is drowning in debt to a bank he secretly owns, and the vacant storefront to your right was foreclosed on by his associates 6 months ago. He traced a line directly to the center of the map, right where a small rectangle was marked 402 Elm Street. Your antique shop sits exactly in the middle. It is the absolute linchpin. To build the mega complex he has designed, a multi-story luxury hotel, high-end retail spaces, and a private parking garage, he needs a contiguous zoning variance from the Oakhaven Historical Preservation District and the City Council. Under local municipal laws, if a single property owner in the middle of a designated historic block refuses to sell or consent to the redevelopment, the council cannot grant the corporate variance. The entire project is legally dead in the water without your land. I stared at the blueprint, watching how Julian's grand, sterile glass and steel monstrosity completely swallowed the beautiful historic architecture of our town. So that's why he was so desperate yesterday. If I don't sign, his entire multi-million-dollar investment is ruined. Exactly. Mr. Sterling nodded. But Julian is not a man who accepts defeat easily. Now that we are clearing the tax lien today, he will lose his legal leverage to force a county seizure. However, the official city council zoning hearing is scheduled for November 12th, exactly 27 days from now. Julian has been pouring immense amounts of money into the local political campaigns of 3 key council members, Councilman Bradley, Councilwoman Hayes, and Chairman Mercer. He expects them to push an emergency ordinance through the council that would declare your building a public safety hazard and urban blight. If they pass that ordinance, the city can legally condemn the building and force you into a mandatory sale under eminent domain. A cold wave of anger washed over me, but it didn't paralyze me. It only sharpened my focus. Can they legally do that if the building is structurally sound and the taxes are fully paid? Mr. Sterling gave a grim, knowing smile. Legally, it's a massive stretch, but with enough paid-off inspectors, falsified engineering reports, and corrupt politicians, they can tie you up in expensive legal battles for years. By the time a higher court overrules them, you would be completely bankrupt from legal fees, and Julian would have already bulldozed the property. That is how sharks like Julian Vance operate. They don't just outmaneuver you, they outspend you until you suffocate. I leaned back in my chair, looking down at the heavy gold bars on the desk. A slow, confident smile spread across my face. He thinks he can outspend me because he thinks I'm a broke, homeless 18-year-old girl. He doesn't know that I have a subterranean treasury that can match him dollar for dollar, asset for asset. Mr. Sterling, how much would it cost to hire the top independent structural engineering firm in the state, the most aggressive public relations team in the region, and launch a full-scale defensive campaign? Mr. Sterling's eyes lit up with absolute delight. For years, he had watched men like Julian buy their way through the legal system, crushing regular people who couldn't afford a proper defense. Now he was being handed an unlimited war chest by a young woman with steel in her spine. To do it right? To hire the absolute best? Mr. Sterling calculated rapidly on a legal pad. An independent certified structural audit will cost about $10,000. Retaining a top-tier corporate crisis management and PR firm to control the local media narrative will be another $25,000. And my firm's legal retainer for a full-scale municipal defense will be $15,000, totaling $50,000 to completely lock down the fortress. Do it. I said without a single second of hesitation. Liquidate whatever is necessary from the gold bars we are selling today. I want the independent engineering firm inside my building by tomorrow morning. I want a comprehensive certified report proving the historic integrity of Sullivan's Curiosities. And I want the PR firm to start highlighting the historical significance of the Elm Street district in the local newspapers immediately. Let's make it politically impossible for those corrupt council members to vote against the community. Celine, this is magnificent. Mr. Sterling smiled warmly, reaching out to shake my hand. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud of you. We aren't just defending your shop, we are going to completely dismantle Julian Vance's grand expansion plan. By the time I walked out of the law office, it was early afternoon. The crisp autumn air felt incredibly refreshing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was the author of my own destiny. I walked over to a local hardware store and used a portion of my remaining cash to purchase a high-end, heavy-duty commercial padlock, an industrial flashlight, and several basic cleaning supplies. When I returned to 402 Elm Street, I felt a deep sense of pride looking at the faded gold letters on the window. Sullivan's Curiosities wasn't a burden. It was my castle. I went inside, locked the front door securely behind me, and immediately went to work. If I was going to fight a public battle to save my grandmother's legacy, the shop needed to look like a treasure, not an abandoned storage unit. I spent the next several days working from dawn until midnight, fueled by a relentless, burning energy. I swept away decades of thick spider webs, scrubbed the heavy dust from the ancient mahogany display cases, and polished the brass fixtures until they shone like mirrors. As I systematically organized the massive inventory, I began to realize that Grandma Clara's collection wasn't random junk at all. Now that the dirt was gone, I could see the true artistry of the pieces. There were rare, mid-19th century grandfather clocks with intricate mechanical movements, pristine silver pocket watches, hand-painted European porcelain dolls, and first-edition leather-bound books signed by historical authors. I carefully cataloged every single item in a new leather journal, realizing that the retail value of the antique shop's public inventory alone was worth tens of thousands of dollars. On the fourth day of my restoration work, a sleek white van pulled up outside the shop. Two men wearing professional jackets with the logo Beacon Engineering Group stepped out, carrying advanced laser scanning equipment, blueprints, and structural tools. "Miss Rhodes?" the lead engineer asked as I opened the door. "I'm David Vance. No relation to your stepfather, thankfully," he added with a chuckle. "Mr. Sterling retained our firm to conduct an immediate, independent structural integrity audit of this property." "Welcome, David," I smiled, ushering them inside. "Please take all the time you need. Examine every beam, every brick, and every inch of the foundation." For the next 6 hours, the engineers meticulously tested the entire building. They climbed into the attic space, measured the load-bearing oak beams, used ultrasound equipment on the brick walls, and checked the stability of the foundation. I watched anxiously as David compiled the data on his tablet. Finally, he walked over to the main counter where I was working, wiping a layer of dust from his hands. "Well, Miss Rhodes, I have to tell you, this building is an absolute fortress. The historical builders didn't cut any corners. The main support beams are solid, old-growth white oak that hasn't shifted a fraction of an inch in 100 years. The brickwork requires some minor cosmetic tuck pointing, but structurally it is entirely sound. There is absolutely no evidence of toxic mold, no hazardous asbestos, and the foundation is completely stable. Anyone who claims this building is an urban blight or a safety hazard is lying through their teeth. I will have a certified, state-stamped engineering report on Mr. Sterling's desk by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, David," I breathed, a massive weight lifting from my shoulders. "You have no idea how important that report is for our survival." The next week passed in a blur of intense preparation. Thanks to the PR firm Mr. Sterling had retained, the local newspaper, the Oak Haven Chronicle, ran a beautiful front-page feature story titled "The Living History of Elm Street. Third-generation owner restores Sullivan's Curiosities." The article featured a striking photograph of me standing proudly inside the beautifully cleaned, organized antique shop, surrounded by glowing historical artifacts. The article detailed my grandmother's legacy and explicitly mentioned that the shop was fully operational, completely debt-free, and structurally pristine. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Local residents, who had watched the historic district slowly get swallowed by modern commercial developments, began visiting the shop in droves. They bought vintage jewelry, historical books, and antique furniture, pouring thousands of dollars of legitimate revenue into my business account. I was no longer an isolated, forgotten girl. I was becoming a celebrated figure in the local community preservation movement. But I knew that Julian Vance wouldn't sit idly by while I dismantled his strategy. He was a cornered beast, and cornered beasts are incredibly dangerous. On a chilly Tuesday evening, just after I had closed the shop and locked the front doors for the night, a sharp, rhythmic tapping echoed from the glass. I turned around expecting a late customer. Instead, my heart stopped. Standing on the sidewalk outside, illuminated by the amber glow of the street lamp, was my mother, Evelyn Vance. She looked fragile, her expensive fur coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her face pale and lined with deep anxiety. She looked around nervously, as if terrified that someone might see her here. My hands trembled as I walked toward the door. Part of me, the wounded, abandoned child inside, wanted to keep the door locked, to leave her out in the cold just like she had left me on my 18th birthday. But another part of me, the part that sought answers and resolution, compelled me to act. I turned the heavy brass key, opened the door a few inches, and looked at her coldly. "What are you doing here, Mother?" I asked, my voice flat, completely devoid of affection. Evelyn looked at me, her eyes filling with sudden, desperate tears. "Celine, oh, thank God you're still here," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "Please let me inside. Just for a few minutes. I need to talk to you. Julian doesn't know I'm here. If he finds out, he will completely destroy me. Please, Celine." I looked at her for a long, agonizing moment, analyzing the sheer terror in her eyes. I stepped aside, opening the door just wide enough for her to slip inside, and immediately locked it securely behind her. Evelyn walked into the center of the beautifully restored antique shop, gazing around at the gleaming display cases and the elegant historical atmosphere. It's beautiful, Celine. You've made it look just like it did when your grandmother was alive." "Cut the small talk, Mother," I said, crossing my arms and standing several feet away from her. "You didn't risk Julian's wrath just to compliment my interior decorating? Why are you here?" Evelyn flinched at my sharp tone, dropping her gaze to the floor. "Julian is losing his mind, Celine. He is completely unraveling. When Mr. Sterling walked into the courthouse and paid off the entire $15,000 tax debt in cash, Julian went into a state of absolute, unbridled fury. He threw a crystal decanter through the glass wall of his home office. He knows someone is financing you. He knows you have legal power behind you." She stepped closer, reaching out her manicured hands as if to touch my arm, but I instinctively stepped back, refusing her contact. Her hands fell uselessly to her side. "Celine, you don't understand the kind of danger you are putting yourself in," she pleaded, her voice rising in a panicked whisper. "Julian has already leveraged everything we own, our house, our private investments, our entire retirement portfolio, to secure the commercial bank loans for this Elm Street project. If the city council denies his zoning variance on November 12th, the banks will immediately call in his loans. He will be completely wiped out. We will lose everything. We will be completely bankrupt." "Good," I replied coldly, my eyes flashing with a fierce satisfaction. "He deserves to lose everything. He is a parasite who builds his wealth by destroying communities and throwing children out into the rain. But he won't just sit there and go bankrupt, Celine," Evelyn cried, tears streaming down her face. "He is desperate. He met with Councilman Bradley and Chairman Mercer last night at our house. I overheard them talking through the office door. Julian told them that if the urban blight ordinance fails, he will take matters into his own hands. He said that an old historic building filled with dry wood and ancient books is a massive fire hazard. Celine, he is planning to burn this place down before the hearing. He is going to commit arson to destroy the building so the city will be forced to clear the lot." My blood ran completely cold. I stared at my mother, the gravity of her words echoing through the silent antique shop. Julian wasn't just planning a legal maneuver anymore. He was planning a violent criminal act that could destroy my grandmother's legacy and potentially kill me if I was inside. "He's going to burn it down?" I whispered, my voice tight with a mixture of shock and lethal determination. "Yes," Evelyn nodded frantically. "He hired a professional fixer from the city, someone who specializes in making corporate arsons look like faulty electrical wiring. They are planning to do it within the next 48 hours. You have to leave, Celine. Take whatever you can carry. Accept his $20,000 and just run away. Please, I'm trying to save your life." Part 5. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind my mother, the quiet of the antique shop felt entirely different. It was no longer a peaceful sanctuary. It was a battleground. I stood in the shadows of the showroom, my heart beating with a steady, cold rhythm. Julian Vance was planning to burn my grandmother's legacy to the ground within 48 hours. He wanted to erase the final obstacle to his multi-million-dollar empire with a single match. But he didn't know that I was already steps ahead of him. I immediately went behind the main counter, pulled out my notebook, and called the private emergency number Mr. Sterling had given me. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night, but the attorney answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. "Celine, what's happened?" he asked, detecting the absolute gravity in my silence. "My mother just left the shop, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "She came to warn me. Julian has hired a professional arsonist from the city. They are planning to burn Sullivan's curiosities down within the next 48 hours to force an eminent domain clearance before the city council hearing." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Mr. Sterling's sharp intake of breath. "Arson," he breathed, his legal mind instantly shifting into high gear. "He is completely desperate. The bank loans are suffocating him. Celine, you cannot stay there. I am calling the county sheriff right now and sending a private security team to escort you to a hotel." "No," I replied firmly, my tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "If I leave, the building burns, the evidence is destroyed, and Julian wins. We don't just want to protect the shop, Mr. Sterling. We want to destroy Julian permanently. If we catch his hired fixer in the act, on camera with undeniable proof, Julian's real estate empire, his political connections, and his freedom will be completely obliterated." Another pause followed, longer this time. "You're proposing a sting operation, Mr. Sterling said, a hint of awe creeping into his voice. "It's incredibly dangerous, Celine. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," I interrupted. "We have the resources now. I need you to use the estate funds to hire the absolute best private counter-surveillance and security firm in the state. I want them here before dawn. We are going to turn this old building into a trap." "I know exactly who to call," Mr. Sterling said, his voice tightening with fierce determination. "A former state police captain runs a high-end corporate security firm in the city. I will retain them within the hour. They will be at your shop by 4 o'clock this morning. Stay vigilant, Celine. Keep the doors locked." At exactly 3:45 a.m., a nondescript gray utility van pulled into the alleyway behind the shop. 3 men dressed in dark tactical clothing stepped out, carrying heavy equipment cases. The leader, a stern man with graying hair named Captain Marcus, shook my hand firmly as I let them in through the secure back door. "Mr. Sterling explained the situation, Miss Rhodes," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the layout of the shop with professional precision. "If this fixer is a professional, he'll try to make it look like an electrical fire starting near the main breaker or the oldest wiring in the building. We brought military-grade, night vision hidden cameras, thermal sensors, and a specialized, non-toxic automated fire suppression system that can extinguish chemical accelerants in seconds without damaging your inventory." For the next 4 hours, Marcus and his team worked in absolute silence. They installed microscopic, high-definition cameras into the eyes of vintage porcelain dolls, behind the frames of old oil paintings and directly above the main electrical panel in the basement walkway. Every camera fed a live, encrypted wireless signal directly to a monitoring station inside the gray van parked down the street, as well as straight to Mr. Sterling's legal servers. By the time the sun began to rise, the trap was completely set. To the outside world, Sullivan's curiosities looked entirely normal. But underneath the surface, it was a high-tech surveillance web waiting to snap shut. "We'll be monitoring the feed 24 hours a day from the van," Captain Marcus told me before leaving. "The moment anyone attempts to breach the perimeter, my team will move in and the local police, who have already been briefed on a suspected commercial burglary, will cut off every escape route. Your only job, Miss Rhodes, is to stay completely safe inside the reinforced vault downstairs when the sun goes down." The next day passed with an agonizing slowness. I kept the shop open for regular business, greeting customers and processing sales with a practiced smile, though my mind was completely consumed by the approaching storm. When closing time finally arrived at 6 o'clock, I locked the front doors, turned off the lights, and walked slowly to the back of the showroom. I slid the massive oak wardrobe aside, opened the heavy trapdoor, and descended into the subterranean vault. Inside the bright, secure treasury, surrounded by my grandmother's gold and historical artifacts, I felt a strange sense of absolute calm. I sat on the wooden stool, holding Grandma Clara's letter in my hands, waiting for the night to unfold. Hours bled into darkness. At precisely 2:14 a.m., the small emergency radio Captain Marcus had given me crackled to life with a faint, static whisper. "Miss Rhodes, we have movement," Marcus's voice reported calmly. "A single suspect has just breached the alleyway window using a silent glass cutter. He is inside the main showroom. Remain in the vault." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't panic. I watched the small monitor screen Marcus had left with me. The screen showed a night vision view of the main showroom. A shadow figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a ski mask and heavy gloves, was creeping silently through the maze of antique furniture. He carried a heavy canvas duffel bag. The intruder walked straight toward the back utility closet where the main electrical breaker panel was located. He zipped open his bag and pulled out a specialized plastic container filled with a clear chemical liquid, a high-grade industrial accelerant designed to burn intensely and leave zero traces for traditional arson investigators. He began systematically spraying the liquid along the baseboards and over the electrical wires. "We have visual confirmation of criminal intent and preparation for arson," Marcus's voice echoed from the radio. "Moving in now." On the screen, the back door of the shop suddenly burst open with explosive force. Captain Marcus and his tactical team flooded into the room, their high-powered flashlights blinding the intruder. "State security, drop the weapon and get on the ground right now," Marcus roared. The arsonist froze in absolute shock, dropping the chemical container as he realized he was completely surrounded. He reached into his jacket, attempting to pull a weapon, but two security officers instantly tackled him to the floor, pinning him down and securing his wrists in heavy zip ties within seconds. Outside, the deafening wail of police sirens pierced the night as 3 squad cars screeched to a halt in front of Elm Street, their blue and red lights flashing brilliantly through the front glass windows. I climbed up the ladder, pushing open the trap door, and walked into the showroom, just as the local police captain was leading the handcuffed arsonist out the front door. Captain Marcus walked over to me, holding a secure digital drive containing the entire high-definition recording of the crime. "It's over, Miss Rhodes," Marcus said with a grim smile. "We caught him red-handed, and it gets even better." Our tech specialist immediately ran a digital diagnostic on the suspect's encrypted burner phone. We found 3 recorded phone calls and a series of text messages detailing the entire payment structure and specific instructions for the arson. The text came directly from a private mobile device registered to Julian Vance. A profound, triumphant wave of relief washed over me. "We have him," I whispered. "We don't just have him, Celine." Mr. Sterling's voice boomed as he pushed through the front door, wearing a heavy winter coat and holding a leather briefcase. He looked absolutely ecstatic. "We have the state district attorney already reviewing the digital files. Attempted commercial arson, conspiracy, attempted destruction of a designated historical landmark, and political corruption. Julian Vance is completely finished." The next morning, the city of Oak Haven woke up to a political earthquake. The Oak Haven Chronicle didn't just run a story about an antique shop. They ran a massive multi-page investigative exposé titled "Real Estate Tycoon Julian Vance, Arrested in Corporate Arson and Bribery Scandal." The front page featured a humiliating photograph of Julian being led out of his lavish suburban mansion in handcuffs, his expensive silk shirt wrinkled, his face twisted in absolute horror and defeat. The investigation revealed the full depth of his corruption. The 3 city council members he had been bribing were immediately suspended from office and indicted on federal corruption charges. The upcoming zoning hearing for the Elm Street megacomplex was officially canceled by the city administration, and Julian's development company was forced into immediate, involuntary bankruptcy as the commercial banks completely pulled all of his funding. 2 weeks later, I stood inside the sunlit office of Sterling and Associates. Julian was sitting across from us, wearing a bright orange county jail jumpsuit, his hands shackled to his waist. He looked completely broken, his skin pale, his arrogant posture replaced by a desperate hollow stare. Beside him sat a public defender, looking incredibly weary. My mother, Evelyn, sat in the corner of the room, weeping silently into a handkerchief, realizing that her luxurious life of security had completely vanished, due to the absolute certainty of a lengthy prison sentence and the total liquidation of Vance Horizon Holdings. Mr. Sterling announced calmly, sliding a stack of legal papers across the table. "My client, Celine Rhodes, is prepared to offer a settlement regarding the personal assets and the suburban estate." Julian looked up at me, his eyes filled with a bitter, defeated resentment. "What do you want, Celine? You've already taken everything from me. My business is gone. My reputation is destroyed. I'm going to prison for 10 years. What else could you possibly want?" I leaned forward, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had thrown me out into the rain just a month ago. "I don't want your money, Julian. I have more than enough of my own. I want the immediate, unconditional transfer of the deed to the suburban family home into my name alone. And I want a signed legal waiver stating you will never, under any circumstances, attempt to contact me or enter the town of Oak Haven again." Julian's hand shook violently as his attorney handed him the pen. With absolutely no leverage left, he slowly signed his name on the dotted line, sealing his own financial ruin. When the guards led Julian back to his cell, I turned to look at my mother. She stood up, looking at me with a desperate, hopeful expression. "Celine, thank you. The house is saved. We can live there together now. Just like before. I can help you take care of it. I looked at her, feeling a deep sadness for the woman she had chosen to become. But there was no weakness left in my heart. No, Mother, I said softly, but with absolute finality. The house is mine now. You chose Julian over your own daughter when I needed you most. You chose comfort over loyalty. I will allow you to live in the guest house on the property, and I will ensure your basic financial expenses are covered out of respect for my biological father's memory. But the family we had is dead. You will never have a say in my life again. Evelyn gasped, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but she slowly nodded, understanding that she had harvested exactly what she had planted. I walked out of the law office and headed back down Elm Street towards Sullivan's Curiosities. The late autumn sun was shining brilliantly, casting a beautiful golden light over the historic brick buildings. Over the next several months, I used a small fraction of the gold bullion from Grandma Clara's vault, brokered safely through Mr. Sterling's private connections to completely transform the antique shop. We restored the original century-old hardwood floors, repaired the historic brickwork, and installed a state-of-the-art security system. I didn't sell off my grandmother's collection. Instead, I transformed the chaotic maze into a beautifully curated